How's it going, film and TV fans? Welcome back to another review on the Off the Cuff Film Reviews channel and the final installment in the Looking Back at Final Destination series of reviews, or Final Destination Reviewed as it were. And today we are of course looking at what is, as of the time of recording, the current most recent installment in the franchise, Final Destination 5, released in 2011. So, you know, the franchise has had a good rest, and in all honesty, this is the perfect point for me that I think the franchise should end on. Obviously, that's not going to happen because Final Destination 6 has been confirmed to be in development. In fact, it's landed its directors and is scheduled for release in 2023 on their streaming on HBO Max reportedly, but it is tentative whether it will keep that release date or not. But Final Destination 5 did something that hasn't been done since the second film, and that's bringing a whole new creative team to handle the movie. Whereas the previous one was brought back David R. Ellis and his writer to direct, and obviously James Wong returned to the third one, and then here we have new director Stephen Quayle behind the director's chair, along with his writer Eric Hisaria, who wrote, he's written some movies, some better than others, that's a fact, but this is one of the better ones, because this, I believe, is one of the best films of the franchise. Hell, even the best film of the franchise, because it tells a really great story that actually is told so differently from most of the other films of the franchise, but also not at the same time. But it tells it in a more unusual way, where I will say, spoiler warning for the ending of this movie, for the twist ending. But I'll be getting into that in heavy detail, but a bit later on in this review. So I'm just letting you know there is a spoiler warning for that. But again, Brian Tyler returns to compose, but I think this movie just feels like it was made with the intentions of it being a round trip place to just have the franchise lay for a bit. It looks incredibly nice, it's shot incredibly well, the characters actually have some weight behind them, and while characters have never been this franchise's strong point, they actually are here quite well, because they actually have character arcs, they have stories, they have emotions that actually work properly in the fluctuation of the story. They work as characters, and that's what's the best part about this movie, is the characters working so well. And of course, to have the man, the myth, the legend, the god, Tony Todd back as William Bloodworth. Fantastic to see Bloodworth back, and he plays a equally cryptic part in this movie that he has in the previous movies. There's some really good deaths, of course. The most famous one from this movie is the gymnastics death, where the girl flips up and just basically fucking falls into two pieces. It's a very iconic death from this movie. But also you've got the Wolf of Wall Street man who gets crushed by a fucking Buddhist monk thing. It's weird. I think this has some of the more solid kills in the franchise that, once again, while look a little CGI'd, they don't look as bad as the last film, but they still look a little bit superficial per se. And again, it's really the ending of this movie that is a key part as to why it is so good. But again, I'll get that a bit later on. It's more, again, the characters are really fleshed out and completely have a complete story arc in this movie. They push the plot forward. They actually have, reasoning, and it's nice to see. Obviously, the opening of this one is the bridge one, which actually goes a little different, because they actually don't get off, like a minute or so before the event happens. They actually get off the bus pretty much as it just starts, so they're still affected on by the bridge. And once again, like entries before but not the last one, actually makes sense that people get off the bus here, because they're going after, like, one of the guys gets off to make sure his friend's alright and to keep the company's collateral damage, and the rest get off to understand what the kerfuffle is and stuff, and then they all run. So it kind of makes a bit more sense. Well, it doesn't make 100% sense. It still makes more sense than the last one, where they all just leave the football fucking stadium for no reason. other than to obviously move the plot forward. But this movie is one of the best of this franchise, and it is so well constructed from a franchise standpoint of being able to pay homage to the previous movies in more than one way, as we'll discover a little later on. We're also continuing to push the franchise in an interesting direction with character arcs and development of the characters. Amazing. But yeah. Now let's talk about the ending, because basically the whole final act, the last act of this movie, is split into two parts. It's a little fight in the restaurant between our two main characters and one of their girlfriends, and then the final sequence, which I will talk about in a minute because that's where it gets spoilery. But the actual fight in the restaurant is actually really well done, and the whole dilemma of this movie introduces the whole idea of if you kill someone, you will take their place in the world and they'll take your place in death, which is an interesting new concept that I'm kind of shocked the franchise didn't do previously, but it's done really well here. For the one or two times I think it's the most prominent time in the franchise in this movie is done is when the boss of the plant accidentally kills his co-worker with the hook thing, like by accident, like steps away and he steps in by accident and he dies, and then therefore the manager guy takes that guy's place in life and the other one takes his place in death, and then that does come full circle by the end of the movie, but we'll get to that. But I think it's an interesting concept that is done quite well here, but it's not that remains the most memorable part of the ending of this movie, and that's because at the end of this movie, the two surviving people, the main character and his girlfriend, I believe it's Molly, question mark? Yes, Sam and Molly, they step on a plane going to France, and then it cuts to archive footage, or tries its best to cut to archive footage, of Alex Browning having his little visionary meltdown before Flight 180 takes off, and everyone who gets off the plane gets off the plane. And at first, obviously our two characters, well, us as the audience know exactly what the fuck's going down. The characters don't know that, and they're just like, oh, what's going on there? Yeah, guy crazy. Anyway, they move on, and then just as the plane takes off and it's smooth sailing, there's a person next to Sam asks the question, what was all that go ruckus with the people getting off the plane? And then the lady says, oh, some kid saw a vision or something, and they laugh about it. But Sam realizes that having that guy, Sam, seeing the vision means that only one thing happens. And yes, what unfolds is that is correct. Final Destination 5 is a prequel to the first movie. Interesting route to go. But yeah, it means the Final Destination 5 is a prequel, and obviously they get on Flight 180, and well, you know how that ends. But here's the funny part: the movie doesn't end directly there. It then cuts to the manager guy in a bar, supposedly celebrating the life of the guy Roy that he killed and took his life off. And then one of Roy's friends comes along and says, "Yeah, it's funny that Roy had like a blood vessel that was about to burst any day. He should have died any day now." And the manager goes, "Any day, did you say?" And then the plane crashes into the manager guy, and his hand flies towards the screen, and that's how the movie ends. Which I think that's quite funny. But yeah, I will say, now I've discussed that twist, that it is, I think, an interesting twist for the franchise, and it works really well, because throughout the most of the movie, there is no mention of Flight 180 or anything like that, and the only time it gets some sort of, not even mentioned, but the only time it comes up of there being events before this is when Bloodworth says, "I've seen this before." Now that could easily imply that there are far more events that have taken place before this one, but even then in the universe people should know that, or that was just put there to bait people into believing that this is, Bloodworth talking about the previous movies that has happened, and just to make things go on to not make people believe in what the twist is at the end. But either way, this is a fantastic movie, and I am intrigued as to how franchise would go for from this movie, because it is a perfect way to end off the franchise, because it ends where it began, and you can't get more ironically awesome than that, really. And now we should talk about this franchise as a whole. It's been really fun to talk and discuss this franchise, a franchise that I have kind of discovered recently. Obviously, having watched the third movie when I was younger, and knowing the franchise existed after that, and actually having seen a copy of the first movie on a shelf throughout most of my younger years, my mum had, and that's how I watched the first movie. It's interesting to see this franchise because I really liked the third one, and I wanted to see how it would evolve, or how it evolved to the point it got with the third one, and how it evolved afterwards. And it is a fairly neat and tight franchise where it's not 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 4,000 sequels and 2,000 different timelines like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street, which we'll get to all that BS eventually. But it is straightforward enough for you to. It is a straightforward enough concept for most people to be okay with the fact that the plot is essentially the same in every single movie. Premonition: people get away from said place. People survive said premonition event, and then get killed off one by one. That is literally the plot of every one of these movies, like to a fucking T. Sure, there's some different elements, and the deaths are cooler in it, depending on installment, but that is to a T the plot of every one of these movies, and you cannot convince me otherwise, because it literally just is the plot of every one of these movies. But hey, doesn't mean they aren't enjoyable or entertaining, and it doesn't mean that they don't feel regurgitated, despite the fact they are essentially the same plot. They do feel like each one they've tried to make it different. Obviously, with the second one, it's whole backwards, and also the relationship to Flight 180 there. With the third one, it felt more, let's take away the FBI kind of thing and just have it be the photograph thing, which was a really cool concept, and actually worked really well for that movie, where you can see kind of what happened next with photographs. Then with the fourth one, it's kind of just like, I guess it's seeing like he has the pre-warnings, but that was the thing in, I mean, it happened once or twice in the second one, and it actually was all related to that single character, but there are a few flashes he gets in the fourth one, and then in the fifth one, it's a prequel, we actually give a fuck about our characters, we have good characters now kind of thing. So it's a really solid franchise. Yeah, it's a franchise that I think has had really highs and some interestingly, albeit fun, lows. I think it's had an interesting cast throughout all the franchises. There's been some big, known names in a lot of them. And it's a franchise that's come a long way in its current 22-year history. And as it is younger than a lot of the other big horror franchises that are still about today, while it didn't have as big of effect as, say, Halloween or Scream, it still feels like one of the more fun franchises, and it's very much different to most other horror movies, sleazy slashers, and metatextual movie moments and stuff like that. It's not any of those. It's its own thing, and I think that's what I appreciate the most about it. It's its own silly, goofy, funny thing without knowing it's silly and goofy. It tries to take itself seriously with the stupid, funny deaths, whereas Scream knows what it is, but that's a different story for a different time. This has been a fun one. And yeah, thank you so much for watching my review series of the Final Destination movies. I highly recommend you check them out. Like I said, in the United Kingdom, Final Destination is not streaming anywhere. Final Destination 2 is streaming on Amazon Prime Video. Final Destination 3 is also streaming on Amazon Prime Video. The Final Destination is streaming on Netflix. And Final Destination 5 is also streaming on Amazon Prime Video in the United Kingdom. So go check them out. Go check out the review themes available on all different streaming services. And yeah, have a wonderfully awesome fun day, and go check out this franchise for you because it's really great fun. Up next, we'll be covering the Friday the 13th films and Nightmare on Elm Street films, and then The Lost Boys. So I look forward to covering all that stuff with you. Have a wonderful day, and bye bye for now.